And with that, welcome you inside this edition of Big Ten Today. Rick Pizzo, thrilled to be joined by Trent Meacham. Weather outside tells us it was a brown-gray kind of day. We both got the memo. All joking aside, we did get to see on a very cold Martin Luther King holiday a little bit of a surprise as part of a rare Monday doubleheader.
Yeah, and a rare road win here in the Big Ten as well. I think this is that time of year. It is brutal outside, midpoint in the season, and we're starting to see some teams hit their stride, which is great to see how they continue to progress or fall here as we get into January and February.
We start, as we typically do, on Big Ten Today with the big story. Ohio State falls to Michigan. That's the surprise, 73-65. Wolverines had really been struggling. Ohio State was one of the early season pleasant surprises, not just in the Big Ten, but really nationally. Now the Buckeyes suddenly 2-4 in the league. And Iowa really kind of left for dead, maybe mid-December, have won 5 of 6. There's Fran McCaffrey, 272 wins now, passing Dr. Tom Davis to be the winningest coach in Hawkeye history after an 86-77 win over Minnesota. We do begin in Ann Arbor. There's been a lot made of this Michigan team right now, the chemistry or at times the lack thereof. Which voice they're listening to, as Juwan Howard has been in and out as the acting head coach. Sometimes it's Phil Martelli who takes over the reins on the sidelines. But there was no questioning how badly Michigan needed that win. And to get it over a really good Ohio State team, I think could potentially turn things in the right direction for Michigan, because they still need to get things turned around over the next 6-8 weeks.
They do, and they had the Fab Five there in attendance last night. You know, I was in the studio, and Ray Fell was saying, hey, you cannot lose when you have legends courtside. He said it happened to him with Rick Mount at Purdue. They lost a game and can't do that. Well, Michigan got it done last night. Rick, there was 3 things that I was really impressed with. The three-point shooting, which has been good all season, plus 27 points difference from the three-point line. But their defense, holding Ohio State to under 40%, they have not been a strong defensive team. So defense was locked in, and then closing out games. This Michigan ball club has struggled down the stretch. Who's going to be the closer? And what was really impressive was it was multiple guys. Nimari Burnett hit a 3. Conwell hit a shot. Terrace Reed didn't have a great offensive game. He knocked down 2 free throws. Burnett got to the basket. And Terrence Williams, 5 for 5 from 3. He hit 2 big ones in the closing minutes. So multiple guys stepping up. I was really impressed with that, finishing the game for them.
I like the game plan because it was obvious their approach was, we're probably not going to stop Bruce Thornton. So we'll let Thornton do what he does, but the other guys won't beat us. Roddy Gale won't beat us. Had a tough night shooting the basketball. Everybody from Ohio State had a tough night from 3. They were 3 of 25. That was the second half. And Michigan basically said, if Felix Okpara is going to get 10, that's fine. Zed Key's not going to be a factor. I think everything that Michigan planned in terms of strategy-wise defensively in this game, they executed to a T against the Buckeyes.
Yeah, they're really good. Roddy Gale was, he had a monster game against West Virginia. To come back to earth a little bit, I thought Michigan did a really good job on him because he's a guy that can really get off. Same with Jamison Battle, who's been lights out, maybe the best three-point shooter so far in the Big Ten this year. Michigan on the perimeter, very good there. Zed Key was a non-factor off the bench for Ohio State. So defensively, this Michigan ball club, they can get up and down. They're one of the best three-point shooting teams in the league. If they can get stops and they can finish games, they can compete, they can win games in the Big Ten. And yesterday, on the defensive end and the closing minutes, they were terrific.
Getting up and down, though, Trent, Doug McDaniel right now is only playing home games
Strange season,
for Michigan, right? We assume that is an academic-related issue so that he can focus on his studies when this team is on the road. But it changes everything. They can't play at that pace, especially on the offensive end, if McDaniel's not in the lineup.
It is a bizarre thing. I'm not sure if I've ever heard of a situation like this, especially with your guy that's really the motor for Michigan being Doug McDaniel. So they're going to have to, I think, play more inside out. Terrace Reed's had some bright spots this year. He's going to have to be more consistent, obviously play through Kamwa. Terrence Williams has been really consistent this year. He averaged about 6 points a game last year. Now he's above 12 points a game, shooting the ball 45% from the 3. So he's been key for them. Without McDaniel, though, on the road, Llewellyn is going to have to play more minutes. And Burnett, you're going to see him at the point guard position. But if they can knock down shots like they have, and if they can be good defensively, maybe they're not out pressuring as much, maybe compact more, maybe some zone. Juwan Howard has changed things up in seasons of what they do defensively. They can still be a competitive team.
Now, this is a nice win. For me, the proof will be in the pudding when they go on the road for the first time against quality competition without Doug McDaniel. to see what pace they can play at. How can they play defensively against another really good opposing point guard, because those are a dime a dozen inside the Big Ten. But for now, big feather in the cap for the Wolverines to beat Ohio State 73-65. You also saw Iowa, Minnesota right here on Big Ten Network, and the Hawkeyes have gotten so much scoring from so many different guys. Josh Dix goes for 21. This is an amazing stat. He's the sixth different Hawkeye to go for at least 20 points in a single game this season. I don't know how many teams in the country can say that, and I think that is what separates Iowa. That makes them so dangerous. They have so many different offensive options, more than just about anybody in this league.
They do, and I love how they play. I mean, they really moved the ball well. They did not shoot it well last night, 3 for 13 from three. I contrast that with Minnesota's 5 for 29. But I like that despite not shooting it well, they didn't settle for threes. They worked it inside out. They spread the ball around. And so many guys that can just make plays. They can dribble it, pass it, shoot it. I know it sounds basic, Rick, but this is what basketball is about. And, you know, they had 6 guys with 2 or more assists last night. So a lot of guys, they share it well. Josh Dix, 21 points. His 5 assists were huge. In the second half, they went to him. I thought he was a guy that controlled that game in the second half. They weren't out in transition as much, but at 6'5", 6'6", guard that can handle it, rise up and knock down shots, he was really impressive. Ben Krikke kind of steadied them early on. They got off to an awful start, coughed the ball up, just gave it to Minnesota a few possessions. We're down 13-4 really early. Krikke steadied them, great from the mid-range. Owen Freeman's playing well as a freshman. They do. They have a loaded roster in terms of offensive weapons, and they're finding their stride now.
Owen Freeman on Monday was named the Big Ten Freshman of the Week for the 6th time this season, and he follows it up with nearly another double-double. And I know Iowa, we never worry about their offense. I think they get some credit, especially as of lately, for their defense. You mentioned the tough start where they turned the ball over a bunch, gave up 13 quick points. Over the last 16 minutes of the first half, they only allowed Minnesota 18 points. You talk about a point per minute. That's on like a 45-point, basically, per game pace. And defensively, I think this team has gotten a little bit better over the last month than people are giving them credit for.
Well, they have a big team out there. They start the 2 bigs in Krikke and Freeman. Tony Perkins at the point guard position. He really did a great job on Elijah Hawkins, only 1 point last night. So defensively, they're good. And I was very impressed with they out-rebounded the Gophers. I thought Minnesota was going to dominate the glass, dominate the paint. They outscored Minnesota 56-38 in the paint. Also, second chance points. They outscored Minnesota 15-12. That was critical because they took away the offensive glass for the Gophers. That allowed them now to get the rebounds and get out in transition, playing to their pace, playing to their style. If they can do that, Rick, I think defensively be solid and rebound the ball, now they're a different brand of basketball than you see in the Big Ten. Multiple weapons. They share it as well as anybody. Last night, again, 23 assists, only 11 turnovers. So you take away those first 3 minutes, they were single-digit turnovers. An impressive road win for Iowa that, Fran McCaffrey hasn't played really well right now.
And our congrats to Coach McCaffrey, now the winningest coach in Iowa program history. I think it's easy to forget where this program was when he arrived in Iowa City after a couple of down years with Todd Licklider. They were playing a very slow style, a methodical style that the fans didn't really seem to enjoy. Fran came in and completely flipped the script. I mean, this is a style that every player loves to be a part of. They have been exciting. I know he sometimes takes some criticism because he is a hot-blooded, super high-intensity competitor. But at the end of the day, he wins a lot of basketball games, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done in the decade plus that he's been in Iowa City.
They win. They do it in a fun fashion, and he's developed pros. So what's not to like? And I thought it was really cool last night, his post-game interview with Stephen Bardo, and seeing him get emotional. This is a guy that we oftentimes see his emotions run pretty hot on the sidelines, and to see that other side of him, I thought was really special to see. Obviously, this means a lot to him. And he's a coach that, watching from afar, you just feel like his guys love playing for him.
They do.
Like, he will fight for his team, and therefore they fight for him, and they play together. They share it, but they're a fun team to watch. And Fran McCaffrey, he's done a great job there at Iowa, and he's still got it rolling.
That's interesting. Off the court, I've known Fran since he was a coach at UNC Greensboro back in 2001. He's a calm, even-keeled, great guy to have a conversation with, kind of an understated sense of humor. When that ball goes up in the air, man, he is as big a competitor as there is in all of college basketball. Take a look at your current Big Ten women's basketball standings. Iowa Hawkeyes with a one-game lead over Indiana, but in reality that is a two-game lead because remember the Hawkeyes just blasted the Hoosiers this past Saturday night. Ohio State, the only other team with one or fewer loss inside the Big Ten. Nebraska, Minnesota, Michigan, Maryland, all with 2 defeats, and those are the only teams at this juncture that are above 500 in league play. Let's dive deeper into those standings and into Big Ten women's basketball. And to do that, welcome in women's basketball analyst Megan McEwen, who joins us from Iowa City, where she'll be on the call for tonight's Hawkeye game. Megan, let's start with Iowa. They're the only unbeaten. They're ranked number 2 in the country. So how big is the gap right now between the Hawkeyes and the rest of the Big Ten?
The gap between Iowa and the rest of the Big Ten right now has grown pretty big. I was surprised at how much they beat Indiana by on Saturday. That was a game that was highly anticipated. The Hoosiers had some travel issues, had to come in the morning of the game. But the show that Iowa put on, the balance that they showed, having 4 different players score in double figures. Caitlin Clark drops 30, which is what she averages. She doesn't necessarily have to put up the 40-point spectacles that we've kind of become accustomed to seeing because Iowa was balanced and multiple people stepped up. When Iowa has those 5 different players that can be a threat to score the ball, they become one of the hardest teams to beat in the country. And that's when they start looking like a Final Four team.
So who else on that Iowa team has impressed you outside of, obviously, the reigning and likely once again National Player of the Year?
Yeah, Caitlin Clark, obviously must-see television. Molly Davis has stepped up in a huge way, and Iowa head coach Lisa Bluder has talked about how aggressive she needs Molly Davis to be in order for Iowa to be successful. Davis started getting to the basket in that Indiana game. She finished with 18 points, but it completely got Iowa into an offensive rhythm. She makes excellent decisions on the floor. Davis transferred in from Central Michigan, where she was a great player in the MAC. She's a point guard by trade. So Iowa, with Clark and Davis on the floor, have 2 point guards. So her ability and that IQ to be a playmaker makes her special, but now she's scoring the ball, which is exactly what Iowa needs to have happen in order for them to continue this success.
Megan, is it possible that we are watching Caitlin Clark this season get even better than she was a year ago?
Yes, it's possible. We're seeing Caitlin Clark in a very unique form right now because of her scoring ability. We don't give enough credit to her athleticism. Caitlin Clark has a very unique ability to get to the basket. She's deceptively quick and she's really strong. So she's able to blow by pretty much anybody to get an open shot. And then we're seeing, of course, the logo threes that we're so used to seeing. But what's impressive is her ability to create space. Against Michigan State, everybody in the building knew the ball was going to Caitlin Clark somehow for the last shot. But yet she still was able to generate enough space in her step back in order to get that shot off. That comes down to simple fundamentals. Her ball handling is fantastic. Her ability to one-on-one have those moves in her toolbox to get herself open and create her own shot. These are all little things that we're seeing that pay over in a massive way when you get to the pro level. You must be able to create your own shot. I don't know if there's anyone better in the country right now at creating her own shot than Caitlin Clark.
That Michigan State game was tight throughout. The Indiana game, as you referenced, was not. Iowa winning by 27. Glad you made it clear to the folks that it was not a normal road trip for the Hoosiers, that Indiana had some major issues. But with a defeat of that margin, how much should that influence the way that we view the Hoosiers?
It shouldn't influence the way anyone views Indiana. I think throughout the course of a season, we all get very caught up in what's happening right immediately in front of us. Indiana was playing great headed into this Iowa matchup. They had come off a road win at Nebraska, which was their best complete game of the season, where they had multiple players stepping up and scoring in double figures. Sydney Parrish for Indiana is getting on a roll. There was a time over the course of 3 games, she hit 11 threes. So getting that outside shooting going from somebody other than Sarah Scalia has been big for Indiana. They continue to have Mackenzie Holmes, who's one of the most skilled and fundamentally sound post players in the country. They have so many pieces that make them really dangerous. They're disciplined. That game was a unique game because 1, you're on the road, but 2, that travel issue where they had to come in the morning up, I think played a huge factor down the stretch when it comes to getting your legs under you, being set in that game time mindset. It's difficult when there's so many moving pieces out of your control happening. But the Hoosiers at the end of the day are still going to be fighting for a Big Ten championship, and they'll get another shot at Iowa down the stretch.
Yeah, not something that's necessarily measured statistically, but maybe the best 2 losses in the country, on the road to Iowa, on the road to Stanford. Ohio State is the only other team, in addition to Iowa and Indiana, with 1 or fewer losses in conference play. They have a massive week. They're at Maryland tomorrow. Then they host Iowa on Sunday. What's the key for Kevin McGuff's team during that 2-game stretch?
Ohio State has to find some consistency. They have yet to be able to do that with all 5 players on the floor. Cody McMahon, who was highly touted coming into the season after a fabulous freshman year, has fell somewhat flat. She's elite at getting to the basket, but she's been settling for a lot of outside shots. Nobody can guard her when she gets downhill. So that's something I'm curious to see over the course of the next month, if she's going to continue trying to get to the basket. They continue to, in that press, not necessarily be as effective. There's some breakdowns that have happened down the stretch. But what's interesting about this Buckeye team is we're seeing how much they miss the outside shooting of a Taylor Mikesell. What made the Buckeyes so dangerous a year ago was they had that press. They had so many weapons that could get to the basket. And then they had a lethal shooter on the outside that absolutely killed you if you gave her a second to look at the basket. But they don't necessarily have that 45% three-point shooter that they've had in the past, and it's hurt them a little bit down the stretch. If they can find consistency, getting the ball turned over in that press, getting points off those turnovers, and then offensively getting some more paint touches for more time on the perimeter for open looks, that's going to be massive for them.
Buckeyes do have a little bit of momentum. They've won 3 straight since that somewhat surprising loss to Michigan in late December. And the most recent of those 3 victories against a really good, really explosive Michigan State team that I believe still ranks among the top 5 nationally in scoring offense. What are the early returns of year 1 of the Robin Fralick era?
I am the #1 Michigan State fan when it comes to, oh my goodness, this is not a team I thought that would be able to do what they've done so far this season. To come in, they go down to the wire against Iowa at Iowa. That game had to be won by a Caitlin Clark heroic shot. But what makes Michigan State unique is they have a bunch of veterans on that squad that have played in the Big Ten. They've been in different roles before, but nonetheless, they have that conference experience. 6 different players on the Spartans have averaged 9 or more points a game. So everybody on the floor is a threat to score the ball at any given point. Put that with Robin Fralick, who's a great coach, had a ton of success at Bowling Green. She's coming to the Big Ten, and they do really disciplined things. They press at a high level and make the right decisions on the second line of the press, so they're able to pick off a lot of people. And then that initial trap they're doing in the press is timed up so well, and players are disciplined, but they're disciplined because they're experienced. Michigan State, sneakily experienced, and that's a team I think is going to finish in the top 4 next month.
Mention that Ohio State and Maryland meet later this week. It's been something of a, I think, uneven season, is fair to say, for the Terps so far this year. They're 11-5 overall, but they're just 1-4 away from home, and they've yet to beat a top 25 team in 3 tries. How do the Terps get back on track?
The Terps get back on track the same way everybody can kind of get back on track, and that's just by finding balanced scoring consistently. Cheyenne Sellers has had a really nice year for the Terps so far. And the reason why we are being so harsh as a society on Maryland is because we're used to seeing them in the top 1 or 2 in this league. This is not a program since they've gone to the Big Ten where they've been in the 3, 4, 5 conversation necessarily. It's always been one of the dominant programs, but you're seeing a lot of new faces come in to this Maryland program. It takes time to get that chemistry going, but when you have Brenda Freese in charge, she's going to get it figured out. You have a really nice player in Bree McDaniel who's done some good things for Maryland this year, but with Cheyenne Sellers in a brand new role where she's having to be a leader and a playmaker, she's done a fabulous job stepping up to the plate. It's just going to take getting a little more help offensively for Maryland.
And not easy either when you're starting a season and you have just lost not 1 but 2 players to the first round of the WNBA draft like Maryland did a year ago. We've touched on a bunch of teams, Megan, but which team or teams that we haven't mentioned yet are worth a watch as we begin the stretch run?
Set your DVRs for Minnesota, folks. They are a blast to watch. First-year head coach John Plitzawhite comes in and has the Gophers playing at a really high level. Mara Braun's the second leading scorer in the Big Ten. She's fun to watch. She hits a lot of those logo threes that are very similar to what we see with Caitlin Clark. They have a great freshman in Grace Groholski who gets to the basket but also can hit it from long range. The good thing about Minnesota's offense is they play so balanced and play together. They love to get downhill and try to create that inside-outside game. They're really young, the second youngest team in the Big Ten with Wisconsin. Those two are the two youngest teams. So when you have a young crew, it's almost good that they don't know what they don't know. And it's also bad that they don't know what they don't know, but they play so freely. They play with a lot of confidence, and they just look like they're having fun when they play. Minnesota is somebody I definitely recommend people tune in to watch because they could do something really special this year. Yeah,
best thing about freshmen, you have them for 3 more years, at least some of the time. Maybe not as much today in the world of the transfer portal in the world we live in, but at least that's the way it's supposed to work out. All right, Megan, I know you got to get the shoot around. Let's get you out of here on this. We saw USC knock off UCLA, a couple of top 10 teams earlier this week. Of course, next year, those teams, along with Oregon and Washington, will be part of the Big Ten. How much will the addition of those schools further strengthen what most already consider to be the best league in the country?
The addition of UCLA and USC and Oregon and Washington is going to be massive for the Big Ten. Women's basketball-wise, UCLA, USC both rank in the top 10 in the country. Two of the most exciting young players as well in women's college basketball with Kiki Rice on UCLA and Juju Watkins on USC. They're both underclassmen, so we're going to get to watch them for a long time on the Big Ten Network. But they bring a style of basketball. It's fast, it's fun, it's free-flowing. They have really high IQ players. The coaching is fabulous. It's going to be entering the league. And keep in mind, none of these Big Ten teams in our conference right now have been able to knock off UCLA or USC. So bringing those two teams into the conference is only going to raise the level of competition. It is going to be a blast to see some of the matchups that start next year.
All right, great stuff as always from Megan McEwen, who is now off to try and do what opposing players can't, cover Caitlin Clark. Have a great call tonight, Megan. We appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks, Rick. Great seeing you.
Raise your hand if in mid-January you predicted that Wisconsin would not only be the only unbeaten left in the Big Ten, but that they would have a 2-game lead in the league. Now, Trent Meacham, put your hand down because I know you're lying. Don, one of our studio folks, also has his hand up. He's lying as well because no one thought that Wisconsin would be this good at this point in the year. But they have been. They have been remarkably balanced. They have some very quiet superstars, and I would rank in this league right now guys like A.J. Storr, to something of an extent, Tyler Wall and other guys, humble superstars. Greg Gard has a really deep bench. This team is not afraid to play slow. They're not afraid to get it in the 80s. I cannot tell you how impressed I've been by what Wisconsin has done.
I did not see this coming.
I appreciate the admission of honesty.
After a disappointing season last year, and a number of things. One, all the guys that came back. You love experience. You love guys coming back, but sometimes the junior to senior leap, it's not quite the same as that freshman to sophomore leap. But all these guys have improved their games. Tyler Wall is healthy. He's playing well. Stephen Crowell, his game has evolved in his time in Madison. Max Klesmit, a guy that was, he fills a role, but he can also go off at 18 and 24 points in their last 2 games. So they have multiple guys that are capable. John Blackwell is a freshman. Nobody on the outside, I think, saw that coming. You still have Chucky Hepburn with the reins as their point guard. We'll talk a little bit more about A.J. Storr and kind of the firepower that he brings to the table because he takes them to another level with his athleticism and his finishing ability. But they're one of the most efficient teams in the country on the offensive end. They defend like they always have, but then they have the depth, the athleticism, the firepower that we have not seen from a Wisconsin team in recent years.
Yeah, I think those 3 things are why I think this could be a very dangerous team in the tournament for non-Big Ten teams to have to deal with because you don't see this style, this amount of balance as much as Wisconsin. And right now, if they're not in the conversation for a number 1 seed, they're certainly a top 2 seed if they're able to keep this going through the course of the rest of the Big Ten season. Of course, we don't expect anyone to have a 0 next to their name at the end of the year, and Wisconsin is the only team that has that possibility because Purdue, the prohibitive favorite, has 2 losses. Now, both in tough places to play, Northwestern and Nebraska, both on the road. That Nebraska game was by 16 as the Huskers handled them pretty good. Does this Purdue team and the way that they play give you more faith in their postseason ability than obviously what we saw last year as they became just the second number 1 to ever lose to a 16?
There's no doubt I have more belief, more confidence that they will, I think, make a deep tournament run. Now, I will say, Rick, they're 1-2 on the road this year. So I think that number will improve. I think they'll do better on the road, but that's not a great start, okay? But, look, you have the best player in the country. After a couple games where he's, somewhat held in check because teams just send 2-3 guys at him, he goes for 30 and 20 their last game. That freshman backcourt and Smith and Lawyer, they're sophomores now, and Smith, I think, is about as good of a point guard as you'll find in the country. We've talked about that pick and roll, that ball screen with Smith and Edey, I think is the best any type of action of any team in the country when those 2 guys are in that 2-man game. Their shooting is really improved. That's another big difference maker from last season. So you have the big fella, you have great shooting around him and good guard play. This team has every bit of a chance of making a Final Four national championship run. My opinion has not changed, but as we've seen, not just from Purdue, but across the country last week, all these ranked teams, top teams, losing to unranked teams, I think once again this race is going to be wide open. And we're hitting a midway stretch here where teams are scouted, teams go through some ups and downs. Purdue's, now they've responded really well to their 2 losses, but you're going to have to string some along to get to where they want to go.
I think this week tells us a lot because they're on the road twice.
Yep.
They have Indiana Tuesday, they have Iowa Saturday. 2 tough games, 2 tough places to play. Can Purdue get it going? And to your point, those freshmen, now sophomores, perhaps not as intimidated. And I think the addition of Lance Jones, a grizzled veteran in that backcourt, will really help when it gets into tournament time. As for Indiana, up and down, neither one of us have been exactly sure what to make of the Hoosiers, but there's no doubt when they play to their potential with guys like Khalil Ware, Malik Renew, and the jump that he's made, Trey Galloway has been up and down. Xavier Johnson needs to stay healthy, needs to stay on the floor. But with all these different pieces, Trent, I just feel like this is a team that, if it puts it together, is a team no one wants to see in March.
Well, their front line is really imposing. When you have Ware and Renew and Mbako, the size. I don't know if there's anybody that quite compares to that size, the length on the front line. Renew has really elevated. All those guys have elevated their games. Mbako, from the beginning of the season to now, he's been more consistent. He's knocking down shots, and at 6'7", 6'8", he can rise up and knock down shots over opponents. We've seen Renew step away from the basket. The three-point ball, that was such a poor part of their game early in the season. They're still not shooting a lot of them, but they're shooting it better. I think, and this has been the question all along, they're a pretty young team without Xavier Johnson. And what's his status? He was out. He comes back, plays great against Ohio State, then is ejected from the game against Rutgers, did not start last game. Gabe Cupps played 30 minutes, did not score a point. So the backcourt concerns are real for Indiana but with that front line, they're imposing every night out.
I just don't think you want to ask Mackenzie Mbako as a freshman to have to go and get you 20 every night. I think that's danger zone, and Mike Woodson's been around long enough to know he needs veterans, not freshmen, to be the guys to lead this team.
There's no doubt. And you look at a guy like Trey Galloway, who is a veteran, that backcourt, that's where they have veterans in Johnson and Galloway. He's played his role pretty well. I think he's been asked to do too much this year.
More than we expected him to do.
The go-to guy, but he's a guy that when he's bringing energy, when he's bringing on the defensive end, that's when they're good, when he can kind of fill a role as opposed to being the go-to guy. If Xavier Johnson can have the leadership and make plays and be consistent for them, I would say watch out for the Hoosiers because they'll be a force here coming down the stretch of the season.
We mentioned that this could be a show-me week for Purdue with a couple of games on the road. How about the next 3 for Indiana? You get Purdue at home, and then you go on the road back-to-back at Wisconsin, at Illinois. You win 2 of those 3. You win all 3 of those games. Everybody looks at you differently. You win 2 out of 3, and I think it changes the narrative of what this Indiana team could be. So the last game in that 3-game stretch is Illinois. Illinois is a fascinating team. I felt like the loss to Maryland at home was the first game since Terrence Shannon's suspension when they really missed him in winning time, making plays out on the perimeter, taking over the game. Marcus Domask is going to score 20-25 every night out. The question is, if Shannon doesn't come back, who's that consistent second guy for the Illini.
Yeah, they're offensively, they've been fantastic this year up until the last two games. Even against Michigan State, only had 71 points. That's well below their average. 67 against Maryland. And what Maryland did is say, hey, you guys are going to play a lot of one-on-one. Well, we have the guys, we have the athletes, we have the size and quickness to match up to your one-on-one players. And sure, Damask went off, but they did a great job in checking Guerrier. Coleman Hawkins, those two in particular, have played great the last month. Had poor games there on Sunday. Justin Harmon, who shot really well, couldn't get anything going. So besides Damask, Luke Goody had 3 straight threes. Nobody was in double figures. And Maryland kind of gave a blueprint of, if you have the size, if you have the defenders, can we match up one-on-one and make it tough on you and not get into rotations? Now, I will say I think Illinois will shoot the ball better. I think Hawkins and Guerrier, they played so well. I don't look at one game as kind of what they are. I expect them to turn it around and continue to play better. Obviously, you're dealing with an unknown status of Terrence Shannon, but this team still defensively, they're very good. If they can have some flow on offense and make some shots, they're another very dangerous team.
Michigan, Rutgers, Northwestern, the next 3. Michigan's on the road. Good news, Rutgers is in Champaign because the Scarlet Knights are a completely different team at home. And then at Northwestern, you know the Wildcats will seek a little bit of revenge after the thumping that they took down in Champaign earlier this year. Pair of Tuesday tips inside the Big Ten. Purdue, Indiana. That is a 7 Eastern tip-off from Assembly Hall. Late game right here on Big Ten Network. Penn State at home taking on the 11th-ranked Wisconsin Badgers, the only unbeaten team here in the Big Ten. All right, let's do this preview chronologically, Trent. We start with Purdue, Indiana. Always fantastic when these two in-state rivals collide. What's the first thing you're going to be watching that shows you if either team has an advantage?
Well, with Purdue, I'm always looking at how do they defend Zach Edey. You got the National Player of the Year there in the post. So how does an opponent defend him? And I look at their 2 losses, Northwestern and Nebraska. They both really sold out on Edey. They were there on the help before he got the ball. Once he received the ball, there's 2, 3 defenders on him, and then they scrambled out of it. I thought Nebraska was terrific scrambling out. And in that game, I look at it, Purdue made a lot of threes, but it got them out of how they typically play. So I'm looking at how does Indiana defend the big fella? Now, they have great length on the inside, so can Khalil Ware, kind of prevent some type of, opposing, with his length? Can he limit him a little bit? But then Renew and Mbako and even a guy like Galloway, do they help off him and then scramble out of that? That's always key. Purdue, it makes it a different type of game. So how does Indiana defend him? They got athletes coming off the bench, and then is it a 3-point contest? But that'll be critical how they defend him.
Yeah, because Penn State had no options in defending Zach Edey. Went for 30 and 20. Kudus Wahab, anytime he left the floor, they don't have a ton of size. They did everything they could, but at 7'4" and with his improved athletic ability, Edey's just a matchup nightmare. If I flip to the other side, who does Purdue then put on Malik Renew? Because does that mean that you're going to have 2 bigs and Trey Kaufman-Renn in the game a lot more with Edey alongside? I know Purdue has options and guys like Mason Gillis and Cam Heide can certainly come in and guard bigger defenders as well.
Well, Renew's a problem, and so that is a question. Kaufman-Renn and First have the most size to combat him. Gillis is their most experienced player. He's also the best on the perimeter, where Renew has become more versatile, and he's also a playmaker for him. So when he has the ball in the post, he's making plays not just for himself. He's got to be the focal point, though, I think, for IU's offense, and he will be a factor. It will be tough for Purdue to match up to him. But when he has the ball in the post, now he's great. The 2-man game with him and Ware, if Edey's going to help out too much, he's throwing that lob to his buddy on the inside, Khalil Ware. Renew he's one of the toughest matchups in this league, and we've seen his versatility only grow here in his sophomore campaign.
It seems like Indiana has a little bit of momentum now heading into the middle of January. Does that momentum continue, or does it hit a 7'4" black and gold wall inside Assembly Hall?
Well, yeah.
That's the $64,000 question.
And look, you're playing at home. Indiana got them twice last year. When you get in these rivalry games, you can almost throw out records. And just it's a different vibe. It's a different energy in the crowd. This place, Assembly Hall, is going to be rocking tonight. And can Indiana use that energy to really get them going? Can they get some confidence knocking down shots? Can they get Purdue out of how they typically want to play? Now, Braden Smith is more mature this year. I even look at how he played against Penn State, 11 assists, 2 turnovers against the pressure of Penn State. I think that bodes really well for Purdue, but it's really the other guys taking care of the ball, making the right reads out of closeouts, shooting it with confidence when they have it, attacking when they don't have it, making the quick pass. That I'm not concerned about Braden Smith. It's the other guys when the pressure picks up. How do they play for Purdue? And if Indiana can, use that energy from the crowd, this could be anybody's ball game.
That is the early game inside the Big Ten. The late game takes us to State College, Wisconsin, big-time favorites over Penn State. Though the style that Penn State plays can give other teams fits. If you're Greg Gard, what's your biggest concern heading into State College?
Probably the style play. And look, the pace of play is always an issue when you play against Penn State, when you play against Wisconsin. Yes, they can get up and down a bit more this year, but they still are playing a slower pace, for the most part. And does this play into Penn State's favor? Are their guards? You look at Ace Baldwin. He had 8 steals and 5 steals the last 2 games. I mean, he really creates some havoc. And then Kanye Clary might be the most difficult guy to keep out of the paint in the Big Ten. So does this, the pace of play, does it favor Penn State? Are those guards getting into the paint, creating havoc? Can they knock down some shots? They've struggled from the perimeter. They're a tough out when that happens. Now, Wisconsin, their depth, their defense, their experience, it's a tough team to speed up. And I look at a guy like Chucky Hepburn. His numbers have fallen in terms of scoring, but he's still averaging 4 assists a game, does not turn the ball over. He's really set the table. And his maturity in taking a step back from the scoring, I think, shows his lack of ego in a good way and his maturity sacrificing for the team.
I also think the qualities of this Wisconsin team, Trent, basically say we're going to be really good on the road as well, because we're not going to beat ourselves basically anywhere we go, and we're not going to be intimidated by your crowd.
There's no doubt that experience helps. They don't turn the ball over. They defend and rebound. And then they don't rely on the 3 ball. So they're not relying on that. They can play inside out. Steven Crowell gets it done on the inside. A.J. Storr, Tyler Wall, who's having a great year. I even think Winter, the young big guy off the bench, is showing some promise. So just a balanced, deep team with that experience. Home or away, they're really tough.
All right, I enjoyed it today. You?
Great time.
You want to come back for more on Wednesday?
I'll be here tomorrow.
All right, let's do it again. For Trent and Megan McHugh, I'm Rick Pizzo. As always, appreciate you hanging with us on Big Ten Today. Enjoy your Tuesdays.